Hey everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Welcome again to another show, and thank you for all the love and support. Hope you're enjoying these shows, and thanks for letting other people know. We are joined once again, ladies and gentlemen, by Mr. Ron Felber, who is the author of the Mojave Incident and the Unwelcomed, the Curious Case of Clara Fowler. Now, Ron was on the show before, and the Curious Case of Clara Fowler book is now live and available. So we got to have Ron back and talk a little bit more, but we're going to dive into some other curiosities about these two books and more. So buckle up, folks. This is going to get good. Hey, Ron, welcome to the show, brother. It's great to have you back.
Good to see you, Brad.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. I may say this quite a bit, but it's certainly incredibly sincere, is that, I really enjoy talking to you. You and I have been talking now for about 20 minutes before the interview.
I think we did the show already.
Well, we got to do it again, though, because nobody else gets to hear it.
Do it again, even better.
Even better. So, first of all, the book is now available, the Unwelcomed.
Yes.
All right.
And of course, it won the Maxi Award, the 2024 Book of the Year, the Maxi Award.
Wow.
2000. So basically, the publishers send in their best work,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there were something like 5,700 entries from large publishers, small publishers, and then they evaluate them. They have like 12 categories, maybe like horror, psychological thriller,
Mm-hmm.
documentary, and then there's the 12. But then they pick the Book of the Year, which comes, above those, and I was really happy to hear that we won.
Oh,
So,
congratulations! That's marvelous.
it was great. Yeah, I woke my wife up. I had a friend in Thailand that found out about it before I did somehow. So he calls me at some ungodly hour and says, "You won, you won." I said, "What did I win?" Then I went in to see my wife, who was sound asleep. We won, we won. What did we win?
Oh, well, congratulations! That's wonderful. And
Thank you.
the cool thing is that, and I haven't read the book yet, but it sounds like you could have qualified for a lot of those categories with this incredible stories and all of the details that went into it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, because there's certainly, more than enough to call it a horror story, because it is.
Yeah.
But it's also based on a true story,
Mm-hmm.
and it's certainly psychological. I mean, a lot of psychology involved, and it's certainly a thriller. So those are three.
Wow. Now, what you were here today to talk about a lot of the similarities between these books and some things that have occurred to you. And this is a fascinating subject because, as I've been doing the paranormal for several years now, 8 to be exact, I think, that was one of the big epiphanies for me, was that, gosh, sometimes, UFO experiences and alien visitation / abduction is very similar to poltergeist experiences, which also bear a lot of similarities to several cryptid accounts and other strange phenomena. What was that for you when this occurred to you?
Well, I wrote Mojave Incident, and the full title, and I just say this to let your audience know,
Sure.
What we're talking about. It's called Mojave Incident, inspired by a chilling true story of alien abduction. Mm-hmm. And so basically, the story is about these people that in October 1989 get abducted in the Mojave Desert. And so, it's a little more involved than that, and we can get into it.
Mm-hmm.
But the correlation between that and the Unwelcomed, which is about demonic possession, the possession of Clara Fowler, it struck me while I was writing, really not even while I was writing. After I had written the Unwelcomed, I started to remember the transcripts, because there were hypnotic transcripts with the alien abductees. And I started to think about that, which happened in, 85 or so, or I'm sorry, 95. And then the Unwelcomed, which happened in 1898 to 1904. But then I started to see the similarities between what these people are reporting in a demonic possession case, which was Clara Fowler, and then the Hesses, Steve and Dawn Hess, in the Mojave Incident. And so it occurred to me, are aliens, in terms of alien abductions, demonic? Are these extraterrestrials, or are they interdimensional beings?
Right.
And if they're interdimensional beings, what's sort of the layout of this, and how do human beings fit into it?
Sure.
And so that's sort of what I started exploring.
That's a huge rabbit hole. I mean, all in
It is.
because again, these phenomena don't lend themselves to any kind of rigorous study. They just happen when they happen, where they happen,
Yes.
how they happen, so you know, to truly dive into it, I mean, we're just left with all these breadcrumbs from these people's experiences. But when you start going down that, I mean, it just really cooks your bacon, huh?
Yeah. But you know, it's such a unique position that I'm in, because I have the transcripts from Dr. Prince and Clara Fowler, the hypnotic sessions, and I have the transcripts from the Hesses, you know, 100 years later, basically. And you can look at, I can look at this and I can look at that and say, well, how are the aliens described? You know, what preceded the abduction? What was the outcome of the abduction? And in these two particular cases, the correlations are amazing.
Wow. Isn't that something? And, you know, and on a spider web of that a little bit, if you don't mind, one of the curious things that I've heard several times, and I've not interviewed anybody directly that has had this experience, but I've heard claims that people that were dealing with potential abduction scenarios, the scenario or the situation abruptly stopped when they cited like the name of Jesus, you know, Jesus help me, or, you know, any.
There are 400 situations like that.
Wow.
That John Mack, in his book Abduction, famous book Abduction, which he wrote not so many years ago, maybe 15 years ago. And this was the Harvard professor, head of the School of Psychiatry and Psychology at Harvard University, wrote this book called Abduction. Wow. And he made that same observation. He had 400 cases that he'd come upon where at the end of it, some reference to God or Jesus or whatever,
right,
stop the abduction process. And I found that very interesting, you know.
Right. Yeah, and it kind of makes you wonder. I mean, are they one and the same, or and it's wild speculation, but is it possible that, you know, that possession is not intrinsic to the human condition? Perhaps it's intrinsic to the extrasolar condition as well, or however you'd explain these beings from different time or spaces or places. You know, perhaps it's more of a universal issue.
Yeah, well, you know, when David Grush did his testimony before the congressional hearings on UFOs, UAPs, he never referred to them as extraterrestrials, which I found very interesting. He referred to them as non-human entities and interdimensional beings, which is quite different from extraterrestrial.
Yeah, it is.
But what is an interdimensional being? What does that mean? Well, angels are interdimensional beings. Demons are interdimensional beings. You know, God is an interdimensional being. And so there really are connections between these stories, particularly these two, and there's clearly a religious element to it. I mean, exactly how that works, I can't say, but there is a religious element to it.
Yeah, that's an incredible epiphany, and it really does. I mean, here's the thing. I think a lot of us, and me included, would like to think that you know, generally speaking, if we're being visited by these beings, however, through extra-dimensional or interdimensional or you know, being cosmic entities that found their way here, it would be nice to think that they were, you know, primarily advanced and hopefully altruistic, but perhaps there is merit to the fact that maybe not all of them are, and you know, maybe there's something more nefarious at work, at least with some of these cases. You know, I mean, my God, it just boggles my mind to think of all the possibilities that are involved with those statements. I mean, it seems like a small statement, but it's just enormous when you
Yes,
start
absolutely.
unpacking it. Wow.
You know, maybe what would be helpful, I have to have a very brief description of each encounter, each book. Maybe we can talk about the relationship,
Please.
from a level where people understand what they're about. Is that possible?
Oh, absolutely. The floor is
So
yours.
here's the Mojave Incident. On the night of October 21st, 1989, 9 glowing objects appeared over an empty stretch of the Mojave Desert and turned a couple's quiet weekend into an unearthly nightmare of terror. Steve and Dawn Hess say they were held captive in their camper by non-human creatures, and through love and prayer were able to live through the psychological torment as their captors manipulated their minds with telepathic powers. The watchers hovered over them for a day and night, stealing their thoughts and emotions, making them relive their most painful and intimate memories, bringing them to the brink of madness. Hours later, they were alone again, alive, but the visits continued and the nightmare wasn't over. Now here's the Unwelcomed, the short blurb on the Unwelcomed synopsis. Is evil real? Is it a metaphor for the bad things people do, or does it prowl the earth like a living, breathing entity that possesses the souls of vulnerable humans? The Unwelcome begins with the arrival of a young Radcliffe student at the office of renowned psychotherapist Dr. Morton Prince. Pursued by a city marshal hell-bent on solving the murder of 2 infants strangled by her father, Clara Fowler relives the nightmare that was her childhood. Exalted by visitations from Jesus Christ and the Blessed Virgin, cursed by the emergence of a demonic presence obsessed with her demise.
Wow.
But maybe even the feel of it, if you just get the feel of each of these, first of all, they're kind of creepy, but they definitely deal with a kind of demonic presence. In the case of the Hesses and the Mojave Incident, they talk about these sort of gremlin creatures with red eyes, glowing red eyes that sort of attack the camper and then actually surround it. And they're trapped in this camper for a day and night. And they describe them very much like Clara Fowler describes the demonic presence that she's seen. Red eyes, part human, part not, sinister, malevolent, etc. Beyond that, in both cases, they both make a big deal under hypnosis and in the transcripts of the smell of sulfur.
Wow.
She says, Clara Fowler says, I know when the demon is going to come because I can smell the scent of heavy sulfur. In terms of the Hesses in their camper, they talk about this, again, this heavy smell like burning rubber or sulfur. That's what finally Steve Hess decides it's sulfur, it's burning sulfur. Then the other thing, in both cases, in terms of Clara Fowler, she has visitations, wants to be a nun, wants to become a nun. And since childhood, she's had visitations from Jesus Christ and the Blessed Virgin Mary. So there's certainly a religious connotation. In terms of the Hesses, in their most dire moments, when they think they're in hell, that they've died and are in hell, trapped in this camper and tormented, a presence comes that they call their comforter. Oddly enough, Clara Fowler calls the Blessed Virgin her comforter, who basically calms things down. Don't worry, you'll get through this. In the case of the Hesses, they see this sort of swirling presence, clearly feminine, in robes, just the way you would describe, or I would describe, an angelic presence, an angel. And that angel, who they call their comforter, says, you'll get through this. Your children are okay. Just have faith.
Wow.
And that's when the aliens recede.
Huh. That is amazing. I mean, I'd certainly, of course, entertain the idea of those similarities. But when you're breaking it down like that in such a granular fashion, it's like, wow. The one thing that I was very interested in was like the the similarity between the Mojave Incident and the case of Clara Fowler, whereas and it's very common in demonic accounts that there's this war of attrition, and it's such a psychological bombardment and the whole demonic oppression thing. Well, I mean, it sounds absolutely identical, and it's like they needed a surrender. They needed the people to submit, and that would be consistent in both cases as well. And it's just horrifying. Now, another thing that was occurring to me, and I don't know. I mean, this is again wild speculation, and I don't mean to go off on weird branches here, but it's like, are they one and the same, or is this a mimic situation where, maybe people aren't as threatened by, aliens as they would be a demonic presence, and so appearing like aliens? I don't know. I mean, it's just obviously there's no way to answer it, but I mean, this is how my mind works when I hear things like this. All of a sudden, I'm going through this catalog in my mind. I'm like, whoa, wait, what?
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
I apologize for going off on weird branches, but it is absolutely fascinating and terrifying,
Absolutely. Well, one of the things too, I mentioned the similarities in viewpoints.
Sure.
Because both stories or both situations, both encounters, whatever you want to call them, really speak to a spiritual world, a world that's outside our world and generally outside our perceptions. It's like a curtain that gets pulled for a very short period of time. In the case of the Hesses, for a day and a half. In the case of Clara Fowler, for 6 years.
Right.
And so it really opens it up to study, and you do have transcripts, and you do have psychiatric sessions. But for example, this is what Richard Hodgson, who was a member of Dr. Prince's team studying Clara Fowler, has to say about the existence of a spiritual world. Quote, "There's nothing absurd in the notion that there may be non-human spirits, good and bad. Nothing compels us to believe that the only intelligences in the universe are those connected with the bodies of human beings. If the evidence for a God and an afterlife is accepted, then we must allow there may be non-human intelligences, either discarnate or associated with cosmic energy in ways we don't yet understand."
Wow.
This is what Steve Hess has to say. He's asked, where do they come from, the alien beings? This is under hypnosis. "They may have been here all along, existing spiritually, but with the ability to become physical. They are from other worlds and are spiritual now, a power and a force."
Wow.
They asked Dawn Hess, "Are we watched regularly by beings?" She goes, "Yes, by many different kinds of beings sent on missions from the One Supreme." "This is like a president," the doctor says. "Like a god," she answers with crackling directness. "What else do you know about this entity? Read the Bible," she shot back.
Oh, wow.
I mean, this is under hypnosis. I was there for the hypnotic session, and I'm going to tell you, you could have heard a pin drop. All of this is going on. But when I look at this, which clearly has some theological or religious, whatever you want to call it, connotation at least, certainly the case of demonic possession is even more direct and clear than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly enough, how could this person have such an intimate knowledge of all of this? Was this some kind of a side effect of the telepathy that they were able to peer into the mind of these entities, or what is your take on that?
No, actually, they were taken on board the craft.
Oh, they were.
They
Okay.
didn't know it, but they had terrible nightmares. Again, these people, generally speaking, and I'm sure there are people that could contradict this, but generally speaking, the people that have alien abduction experiences don't come out of it happy.
Right. Yeah.
And so the same is true of the Hesses. They had terrible nightmares after their experience in the camper, where basically they were sort of tormented, put through emotional ups and downs, having to relive horrible things that happened in their life, exhilarating things that happened in their life. And Dawn Hess's explanation for that was they don't have emotions. They don't understand human emotions. And so they're trying to study our reaction to different stimuli, let's say.
Wow.
And like I said, they don't come away feeling great. As a matter of fact, in this particular case with Steve and Dawn Hess, they became very religious. I mean, they had horrible nightmares. They were hypnotized. And this kind of thing, almost like a channeling, happened.
Right.
Where Dawn Hess in particular is spouting, like truth.
It's amazing and terrifying. I find it interesting that take about that they've been here for a long time, of course, because the latest theory out of Harvard or whatever regarding these extraterrestrial or these other beings that are here could possibly be living here on Earth and being in the Earth, or any number of ideas, but it certainly seems to correlate with that hypothesis.
Well, I mean, you're talking, I guess, these theories about a multiverse or multiverses.
Sure. Right.
But if you think about again, this is very direct and straightforward. But Jesus Christ said, my kingdom is not of this world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that leads you to say, like, okay, fine. From what world is your kingdom? Where is your kingdom? Yeah. It's in another world. It's in another dimension. It's somewhere else. It's not here.
Yeah, that's pretty intense. But it is incredible. Now, did she or he ever offer a physical description of what they saw, as far as what these? I mean, did it look like the classic grays, or did it look like? I mean, you said the glowing red eyes and such, but
sure. I'll tell you what. I have a description. Let's see if I can't find it. I think I can. Here's a description of the craft that's very specific.
Okay.
We can maybe start with that. The craft was larger than anything they'd ever imagined could fly, more than a football field in diameter and shaped like a disc with an elevated dome that rose up from its center. It was encircled by brilliant white lights flashing in what appeared to be coordinated, coded rhythms. Together they watched in awe, stunned, as the huge craft shot a probe, perhaps 200 feet in diameter, down to the ground, then began transporting objects both into and out of the spacecraft. From the disk's underbelly hung 6 smaller units the size of helicopters and designed like miniature versions of the mother craft that suddenly became visible. All of this was happening right before their eyes, and it was overwhelming.
Oh, man.
Here are the illuminated beings.
Okay.
And what's fascinating about this, Brent, is I'm going to read you the description they have of the illuminated beings. These are the people that surrounded their camper, the creatures that surrounded their camper. But then I'd like to talk about a visitation that happened in Zatoum, Egypt, where for 3-4 years, people watched the Virgin Mary as an illuminated being, an illuminated figure on top of St. Mary's bell tower. So here's the description of the illuminated beings and the odor. It was then he became, Steve, aware of the smell, a rank chemical odor like phosphorus or burning rubber. It was sulfur, he concluded, just before his heart stopped and the words issued forth from his mouth in the lifeless monotone of saturate shock. What else, huh? What else do you see? My dear, sweet Jesus. Starts praying. She implored, then began crying, for peering into the camper window, totally illuminated, was a third type of being. Steve knew immediately that these were the ones responsible for the telepathic messages. They arrived in a group of 9 circling the camper, staring in the windows of its shell like spectators observing animals in a zoo. Taller than the others, they stood perhaps 5 feet in height, with enormous raven black eyes and long spindly appendages connected to an underdeveloped torso the size of a 3-year-old child.
Wow.
They described the eyes, but it was their eyes that most frightened Dawn. Large, dark, piercing eyes without iris or cornea that seemed to bulge like an insect's, then narrow into a vortex of chilling emptiness, intense and ubiquitous, totally lacking any semblance of human emotion.
Wow. Yikes.
That sounds kind of demonic, right?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it does kind of resonate with a lot of the description of the alien grays, with that spindly bodies and those large eyes and such. But yikes. Oh, my God.
Actually, when they, as I said, they got closer to religion and actually moved to Salt Lake City. They were Mormons. And the bishop told them, understanding this story, said, you didn't have an alien abduction experience. You had a demonic possession experience.
Oh, yeah. Wow. That is just frightening. Ugh.
It is. It is, because it makes things seem like they're out of control. And maybe to some extent they are. On the other hand, maybe these are some kind of weird test.
Yeah. That's a great point. I guess the one takeaway that occurs to me is that it definitely brought them deeper into their own faith,
Yes. Yeah, that's true. And by the way, if you take somebody like Padre Pio or St. Francis of Assisi, they've had visitations, they had stigmata even, and they talk about a demonic presence that tortured and tormented and tried to lure them into away from their faith. So again, I'm not trying to make this a religious situation,
no,
but it's impossible to ignore the overtones, at least, that arise in these stories, particularly these two.
Yeah, and in fact, I was going to go into that direction about how these people that are, I mean, like Padre Pio and Saint Francis of Assisi, how they were tormented, and it's seemingly, I don't have the mind of God, so I don't know what God was thinking here. But it seems like that this was allowed to happen. They were already, I don't know, you know what I mean? It's like kind of tempering their metal, so to speak, or like a blacksmith hammering the metal into the final work of art. And It seems like,
that's very interesting. That's really a great way to put it.
Yeah,
but you're gonna have to run your show on Sunday morning. We keep this up. but even Christ was tempted by a demon.
Sure, that's true.
You want power, you want wealth, you can control things, you can control the world, than the temptations of Christ. But in a way, these things are similar. They're not the same exactly, but they're similar.
Yeah, similar enough that it's absolutely a frightening prospect. And I guess if evil's going to act on you, it maybe doesn't matter as much how it appeared. It's just that it appeared and how you handle it and that you get through it. But my God, it is frightening. I've talked to and interviewed a few people that have had firsthand experiences with abduction, and one person in particular he was just a tormented soul, a very brilliant guy, an investment banker, and had an incredible professional career, but his whole life was underscored by these visitations, by these experiences, and it just seems like such a horrifying scenario to have something acting upon you that you didn't sign up for, and
that's right.
Seeing and hearing the torment in his voice, and and hearing him break down during the interview, it was just heartbreaking, and it's just hard to understand what these people have experienced and such. But on the contrary, I've talked to people who thought their experiences were incredible, and these real illuminated experiences. And I guess at the end of the day, I never at the time really considered the fact that, the spiritual visitations and stuff could be the same kind of thing, but it's just in a different form. It's like, you know what I mean? It's that they may be representing the same wills or the same end game. It's just that the manifestation of it is very unique to the individual, because there's, again, this bleed through is more than just coincidence. It's got to be, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was just watching some stuff on the James Webb telescope.
Yeah.
And some of the things that it's been finding. And it's a little bit like quantum mechanics. Everything, the foundation, platform that our beliefs from a secular point of view are based on are being like knocked over like fiddlesticks or something, because at the end, what the Webb telescope has shown is that there are galaxies, 6 galaxies that shouldn't exist by the theories that we've been basing our sense of reality on, and that there is an infinite, I could underline that, an infinite number of universes.
Yeah.
And so this is a much different reality than we thought. For example, then you have Newtonian physics, which goes back again like 150 years, but it's held for that long. You have an apple, you drop it, and gravity brings it down. These are the parameters that we exist in. But then Max Planck comes along with his theories of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, the new physics, and says, no, it doesn't work that way at all. And this wasn't so long ago. And now we talk about atoms, but then even subatomic particles really being, at least so far as we know now, the foundation of the world we see.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my point is, we know very little and maybe nothing about what's real. What we talked about this earlier, what our brain does, and this is Aldous Huxley, is screen. So basically you're talking about survival. So you talk about a warm place to sleep, I suppose, a way to defend yourself against enemies so you survive, a way to eat, a way to procreate. And so basically your brain is programmed for that. It isn't programmed to take in what's real. What it sees are kind of icons, like you see on a computer.
Yeah.
This icon is for food. This icon is for water, et cetera, et cetera. But that's all we see. If somebody had mentioned to me, it's like looking in a mirror. So you look in a mirror, you see your face. And somebody else says, all right, that is Brent. But that isn't Brent. Brent has ideas. Brent has dreams. He has aspirations. He has loves. He has thoughts. He loves opera. He loves Led Zeppelin, whatever it might be. But to say that this is what you see, that's what it's like for us.
Sure.
We see a face, but we don't see the huge reality behind it. And if you buy into that, and if you buy into the idea that, as many Christians do, and I think these Muslims as well, Mohammed, that there's a spiritual world, from the religion that you believe in, well, then you have 2 points. One, we have no idea what the world is from a scientific point of view. And that I think that most physicists would agree on that, particularly now. And the other is, well, we do have beliefs based on experiences, personal or biblical or whatever, that there's a spiritual world. So could it be that what we see, you and me and around this room, is the icon, but what's real is the spiritual world?
Right.
That would be the case I'd make.
That's a very powerful case, and I would say that certainly there's a big key, I think, in a lot of this is the ability of the person to observe the phenomena, whatever that may be. Now, I mean, I've been bringing it up kind of a lot lately, but it still rattles my brain. And it was an interview I did with Ronnie LeBlanc of Expedition Bigfoot. And he was talking about this experience where, and this just deals with perception, but I think it needs to be really driven home in light of what you just said, especially. But this guy who was an adamant believer in Bigfoot went out with two of his friends. First friend was open to the idea. The second friend was absolutely not interested and thought it was a bunch of hooey. So they went out and sure enough, according to Ronnie, they had an experience there suddenly. And they went to this area where there's a lot of sightings and out steps this Bigfoot. And the guy that was an adamant believer saw very clearly, could talk about details of what he saw and explain it very, very granularly. The second person that was open to the idea saw a dark silhouette in the shape of a Bigfoot, but couldn't really see any details. The third person saw absolutely nothing.
Isn't that something?
Right.
Isn't that something?
So, you're dealing with perception and the what you were talking about with filters. And it really is pretty amazing because three people were in the same place experiencing the same event, but all of the three of them had a different experience with that event.
Well, one of the things that I find fascinating, there are two. I was in Portugal not long ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, and at Fatima. And very similar. So these three girls, shepherdesses, they're just, peasants, whatever. They have no affiliation with anything, pretty much. They're poor and not educated. So this is Portugal, October 1917. They call it the miracle of the sun. It was witnessed by 30,000 people. But very similarly, these three girls would have this visitation from the Virgin Mary. And the Virgin Mary told them various things, three secrets, as I guess we know. And finally, nobody believed them because nobody could see the Virgin Mary except them. And then the bishop, became quite a situation. The Catholic Church denounced them. They're crazy, And then finally the bishop said, all right, look, when you see the Virgin next time you see the Virgin Mary, tell her we need a sign. And so they said, fine. And this would have been the sixth visitation. And 30,000 people watched a very interesting thing. They watched the sun dance in the sky and then head straight towards the earth as if it was going to crash, then turn back and register again in the sky where it was supposed to be. And it had been pouring rain, and just before that happened, the rain suddenly stopped. But 30,000 people witnessed that. It was in the newspapers, etc. But at the end, the only ones that could see the Virgin Mary were them. They were the only ones. Now, I made a reference to Zatum, Egypt. From April 1968 to 1971, 250,000 people, including the president of Egypt, Nasser at the time, saw an illuminated figure, a beautiful woman, the Virgin Mary, and the bell tower of St. Mary's Church, high up. They observed it. Military people observed it. Police officers observed it. Regular people observed it. Skeptics observed it. And this went on, again, 250,000 people went on for years, 2 to 3 times a week. And so it's interesting. One of the quotes from the Unwelcomed is, if Jesus Christ stood on the top of Trinity Chapel in Boston and gave a sermon, the people that believed in Jesus Christ would say, we just saw Jesus Christ give a sermon on top of Trinity Church. The people that didn't would say it's mass hysteria. It's delusions. It's, whatever it might be. It's a fraud. It's a hoax. But the people that believed would see what they needed to see. The people that didn't still wouldn't see it.
Right.
Which tells you something about a lot. The perception, the idea of perhaps certain people are wired to be more sensitive to be more intaking, to not have those barriers that the brain puts up. Maybe there's an element of porousness where these experiences come through for certain individuals.
It is. I mean, it's fascinating, and there is a power. How do I say this? I wanted to also mention the double slit experiment, which is of course very famous with looking at whether a photon is a particle or a wave, and it was both, but it only became particle when it was observed, and
yes,
and it's like, and I think a lot of people look at that as like, wow, that's interesting. But it's incredibly interesting because that means that the mechanics of the universe, at least for these photons, changed characteristics depending upon the expectation of the observer.
Yes.
And that to me is absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, it just shows that, we are an integral part of the experience, and not only in just filtering it, but that it was the characteristics were measurably different depending on whether it was being observed or not. And it's like, wow, how does that correlate to the rest of our experience in reality? And yes. I'm sorry if I'm spiderwebbing out, but it does.
No. I find it fascinating.
It is. It's incredibly fascinating. And it's also incredibly empowering, because the observer is an integral part of the experience. It's not, and we were talking about this a little bit before the show about oftentimes people are left feeling victimized, and certainly the people, Clara, Fowler, and with your Mojave Incident book,
yes,
that by all intents and purposes were, but maybe it is somehow an integral part of their experience in the in the formative aspects, in the possibly tempering the metal as we spoke of,
yes,
or any number of things. I would be curious, and I don't mean to ask you to give away the scope of the book, because I do want people to go out and listen to it. What did they end up doing? Did they end up, I mean, obviously it was a very formative experience and really did drive them deeper into their faith and their devotion.
This would be the Hesses we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah?
Yes. I'm sorry. I should have clarified, but
fine.
Did they go on to do fantastic things, or did they just go on to live great lives?
I think they lived, I've lost touch with them over the years. Okay.
Sure.
I know that they embraced their faith.
Mm-hmm.
I know that they, became far more religious than they were prior to the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that they have a beautiful family.
Oh, wonderful.
So I guess we can leave it at that.
Well, sure. And who knows, what their family will end up accomplishing, or any number of things. Certainly, the fact that, just to go to a biblical reference, Mary was told she was going to have a child, and she had this child, and that was a miraculous experience. Now, if that was the end of the experience, it would have been great, but it became what we understand as Jesus Christ, and of course, all the miracles associated with that. So I don't know. Again, my mind goes crazy with these interviews, because I just love exploring ideas and possibilities and what it could mean.
Yes.
And all of these answers I'm sure are unanswerable, all these points and questions. But I think it's incredible to look at, because I've always considered this stuff. The reason that I'm doing the Paranormal Portal is because I don't think this stuff should be dismissed, any of it,
Mm-hmm.
because it all represents a profound experience of the world, for all intents and purposes, turning on its head. Like, it's not supposed to happen. My cereal bowl isn't supposed to move. That's not how things work, but they do. And
Mm-hmm.
what is the overarching ramifications for us? Well, as you alluded to, it really makes you question the nature of reality. It's like, wait, it's not just Newtonian physics. Now there's, quantum mechanics, and what does that mean? And how amazing is our experience here that we're not perceiving, that gets filtered out. But this stuff just hits like a hammer. It's like, well, you can't ignore this.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, frankly, both of these cases, if you look at them, you say, you can't ignore them. You have to say, well, there's some merit here.
Right. Now,
what's open is the interpretation. What does all this mean? You could, come up with your own conclusions. But what you can't deny is that it happened, they happened, and they're supernatural in the sense that nature shouldn't operate this way.
Right.
Yeah, they're above nature or the side of nature, but nature shouldn't operate this way. But nevertheless, 250,000 people looked up and saw this image of the Virgin Mary in Egypt. One of the things that Dawn Hess said, and it occurred to me just while we're talking, and I could get the quote, but let me paraphrase.
Sure.
The doctor says, "Tell me more about these creatures," and she says, "We're made in God's image, but they're not." Isn't that incredible? Yeah, that's what she says.
Wow. That's an incredibly deep and profound statement, because, does it mean then that somehow they came about outside of this divine mind and influence, and are they from somewhere way else?
Yes.
Like they're so much not a part of our experience, but they're here, because I think a lot.
But wouldn't a demon?
Well, that's what I was.
Be made in the image of God,
Sure, and that's it's interesting, because we don't know whether that means the corruption was not in God's image, at which drove the angels to be fallen, if that is the case, or does that really mean that, look, they weren't even made here, but they got here somehow, and now we get to deal with it. So
yes,
it's an interesting.
Yes.
Interesting to postulate that. Yeah.
John Mack, I just have a quote here that
Sure.
I pulled out in his book, Abduction, in 1994. And I told you, John Mack, of course, as you know, is head of the Harvard Department of Psychiatry.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he, in his book, called the aliens in alien abductions, and he studied hundreds of these cases. He called them spirit beings come to us from another dimension. That's John Mack.
Wow.
And so, what's interesting is I see a shift in the way that people are viewing this, like a John Mack, like a David Brush, in that they're now talking about not extraterrestrials, but interdimensional beings. Tucker Carlson was on Joe Rogan not long ago. Mm-hmm. And I guess he's become something of a quasi-expert on UAPs and stuff. This is what he had to say. If the aliens are spiritual beings, which I believe they are, it's binary. They're either team good or team bad. Good, evil. They're supernatural because they're above nature as we know it. These are an advanced race of beings from somewhere else, but the template that every society before us has used is a spiritual one. There's a whole world that we can't see that acts on people, a spiritual world that's acting on us, good or evil, all the time. In 1898, and that was in 2024, in 1898, this was what Richard Hodgson, a member of the Prince team studying Clara Fowler, had to say. The one fact about demonic possession so remarkable in our time is the power these hostile beings exert among men, and what they may, in far more subtle and less obvious ways, do to corrupt us. It's almost the same statement,
Right. Yeah.
and separated by many, many years.
Yeah, it's interesting that they and several others have come to that same conclusion, and again the spiritual aspect of those people who have experienced using religious statements to end abduction situations is it's definitely seems to correlate with that idea. And God only knows. I mean, they seem to act as we were talking before. I mean, that was one of the things that really blew me away was as I was diving into this stuff, because everybody thinks they got an idea. Well, ghosts and spirits and demons and stuff are here, and then UFO stuffs are here, and there's cryptozoology, but there's such a blending and melding, and one is nearly interchangeable with the other depending on the circumstances, and it's like, well, that's got to mean something a lot more than just the fact that they all learn the same bag of tricks,
Yeah.
So,
well, just taking this statement, we're made in God's image, but they're not. If you look at things in a way, I mentioned to you in our last interview that I was a deputy sheriff, and I transported federal prisoners for a number of years. and came across some pretty bad hombres, as they say,
Sure.
Killers, real and true killers, people that killed for fun and tortured people for fun, sometimes little girls. I mean, just really monsters. Okay. So basically, in our world, you have the Jack the Rippers, which we talk about in The Unwelcomed, the H.H. Holmes, the Ted Bundys, the rest there. But then we have the Mother Teresas. We have the people that dedicate their lives to helping others, the people that work in leper colonies, people that do things that ordinary people would never dream of in the name of goodness. So you have a good and an evil in front of us. Most fall in the middle, probably you and me, in the middle.
Sure.
But on these peripheries are those two. I think that if you say we're made in the image of this world, that the spiritual world isn't unlike that. That there is a good force that is mirrored in the Mother Teresas. And there is a nefarious, awful, terrible force that's mirrored in the Jack the Rippers. With us in the middle, with human beings in the middle, pulled in this direction and in that direction, with the choice we have to make about the kind of life we want to live, and perhaps the kind of afterlife we choose to live.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's powerful, powerful stuff.
Yeah. So in a way, there's a great line in The Exorcist. So the Exorcist comes in, he's this older guy, old guy. He's done exorcisms before, and he's, stately looking, maybe even gaunt and ghostly looking too. And the psychiatrist priest says, so far there have been 27 different personalities that have shown up. And the older priest looks at him and says, no, there's only one. Meaning at the end, maybe it isn't so complicated as we think. And maybe for all the quantum mechanics and all the theories about astrophysics, etc., maybe it really boils down to some fairly simple things. Like at the end of the Unwelcome, the doctor and the detective, the city marshal, who's there to prosecute the father, drops all the charges. He sees what's gone on and decides to go back to Fall River, where he came from. And he was obsessed with this. And so the doctor says, what made you change your mind? And he says, and this is part of the book, said the demonic presence, the demon said that he had grand plans for the future, that he would mold the human race in the 20th century, which, by the way, is the bloodiest century in history. And I figured out how to defeat him. And Prince just stares at him, and he goes, acts of kindness, Dr. Prince, acts of kindness.
Well, that's beautiful. Because oftentimes I think
it's true.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's amazingly profound. It seems like, well, you're just kind of walking away and giving up, but no, I mean, you're by what you're doing, you're kind of initiating a new wave, another positive wave to counteract all the negative, and that would be much more powerful in my mind as well. That's a beautiful statement. Very cool.
Yeah, that's the end of the book, and I love that line. Yeah. It's my favorite line in the book. But there's another line that I like, if I can find it, that Hodgson says to Prince. This is in The Unwelcome. He says, so he's pleading with the doctor who's convinced, he would never say this is demonic possession. He doesn't believe in the spiritual world. He's a hardcore materialist. And then there's this other Hodgson who's now talking to him, who's a psychic researcher, a psychical researcher. This is fact. Don't you see, Morton? Can you not bring yourself to understand the great mystery we stand on the threshold of solving? I beg you, consider at least the possibility that here at last, in the city of Boston, 1898, is tangible evidence of transcendence. If there are demons, there must be angels, and probably a God and a life everlasting.
Yeah.
So what the book really puts on the line is the argument between the materialist and the believer, the skeptic and the believer. And again, as you had said, they're both looking at the same thing, but they don't see the same thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, God willing, people will always look towards the goodness of stories like this, because I think that, as we've stated many times, they are terrifying, but they are it sounds like in both cases they are incredibly victorious in both cases.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, and
It's absolutely true. If you really look at it,
yeah,
and say what is the ultimate result. Clara Fowler winds up being cured. I don't think I'm giving away anything, but she winds up being cured and actually marries Dr. Prince's protege, Dr. George Waterman, who is a Harvard Medical School graduate, and lives a productive life. Her name had been disguised in all the records, so no one knew that she was Clara Fowler. She became Clara Waterman. And that's what people knew her as in Boston, and became a member of high society, along with her husband, who was a prominent doctor.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, and this experience was something that, it's sort of like walking through the valley,
Yeah.
coming out the other side. Yeah. But I would say in real life also, and this is not so old as the turn of the century, but not to speak for the Hesses, and I don't want to, but I would say, speculating, that they would say they came out on the right side of this situation and are stronger for it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, they are, everybody loves the Rocky stories, and these are two great examples of that kind of a situation where you're just, I mean, my God, what it would feel like to have these things acting on you and feeling nearly powerless to hold yourself up, but they didn't give up, either of them, and that's amazing to me.
Brent, we'd have to do a Rocky 7. It would be called Rocky Balboa in Hell.
Call it Rocky Balboa out of hell, maybe.
In and out.
That's right. Oh, I think this is wonderful. I really always love talking to you, Ron. It's just it's an amazing journey of ideas and thoughts, and of course, all of your research is incredible. The fact that you recorded it in the form of these books is absolutely amazing, and I can't encourage all of you out there listening enough to go check them out. And could you let people know what is the best avenue to get these books?
Yeah, The Unwelcomed, the Curious Case of Clara Fowler, is right now on Amazon, and it's being advertised a little bit. And actually, it's at where? Lionsgate.
Oh,
Lionsgate, and being reviewed with some interest, I hope, for a film.
okay.
But The Unwelcomed is available Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc. right now. The Unwelcomed, as I mentioned, was written, I think, in 2015, so a ways ago, but it's still available on Amazon. And I think it won the Albright Award for books about UFOs and alien abductions. It was an award that it won in 2015.
Okay.
And
so you mean the Mojave Incident was written?
Mojave Incident, yeah. Okay. And then The Unwelcomed won the Maxie Award this year for Book of the Year. So they're both my best books. And when you put them together, it's almost like it's this sort of, you could put them together as almost book one and book two.
Yeah, that's amazing. I would have never. I've certainly, again, I've heard references to the, and seen references in storylines that I've covered of the similarities. But once you break it down on this level, it's like, oof, I got a lot to think about.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, granular is a fair word. I mean, if you're, a researcher, a literary researcher, a scientific researcher, whatever, and you start to put, fact sheets together, you could almost take them, again, like the books, and just combine them you know?
Yeah.
There's that kind of connectedness.
Well, it's an amazing journey, and I really am thrilled that you came back, that we could revisit the Unwelcomed, as well as correlating it to the Mojave Incident. That's so incredible, and thank you so much for making this happen today, Ron.
That was a lot of fun. I always enjoyed talking to you, Brent.
Now, is there any way people can keep in touch with you? Do you have an email or something you want to throw out there?
I do. I have a website. It's just easy. It's an easy one, ronfelber.com. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram. So, if somebody wanted to contact me, that would be a way to do it.
Well, thank you again, sir. And again, it's an amazing pleasure. I look forward to our next visit.
Sounds great. Always fun.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.